Well, good morning and welcome to our time together on Friday, the 10th of July. Now, today is an important day in Scotland. Today is the day when face coverings become mandated, that is law, in Scottish shops. If you get into a shop today, you're going to need to wear a face covering. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. I'm going to read an article for you today that's written by an editor for the Gospel Coalition, which addresses the question of how Christians ought to, in his view, think about this matter, the whole face covering thing. It's written from a US setting, and perhaps you'll not agree with everything that Brett McCracken says here, but I do think that you will find some interesting views and interesting perspectives in it. So Brett writes, he says, for Christians, it's important to think through what our faith would call us to in regard to wearing or not wearing masks. As much as I dislike wearing masks, sympathise with some scepticism about them, and cringe at attempts to shame people into wearing them, my Christian faith leads me to wear one when I am in indoor public places. When I look at Scripture, I don't see a mandate about masks, of course, but I see an invitation to do at least 4 things. So McCracken has 4 points that he'll put forward to suggest why Christians ought to wear masks. Number 1, to love your neighbour. And McCracken says this is a brand new virus and a fast moving crisis. We probably won't know for years what was right and wrong in our efforts to stop COVID-19, but consensus is emerging that wearing masks does slow down the virus spread and thus can save lives. For Christians called to love our neighbours as ourselves, wearing a mask in public, particularly indoor spaces where social distance cannot be guaranteed, seems like a relatively easy way to practice neighbourly love. Even if it's annoying to wear one, and even if you aren't convinced by the science behind it, why not wear one anyway? Given the enduring uncertainty about the way COVID-19 spreads, shouldn't we err on the side of more protective measures rather than less? For the sake of our neighbour, we might, even if it's in a slim chance, unknowingly infect. So he says to love your neighbour, this is one of the reasons you would wear a mask. Secondly, he says to respect authorities. Romans 13 verses 1 through to 7. He says it's easy to blame leaders these days, and certainly many are making lots of mistakes, but let's show them grace. COVID-19 is just one of several complex and fast evolving issues authorities everywhere are facing. Instead of rushing to criticise leaders, what if we gave them the benefit of the doubt? Honouring and respecting their authority and believing that they are working hard and trying their best. It seems clear from Romans 13 and Titus 3 verse 1 and 1 Peter 2 13 to 14 that Christians ought to respect the human governments to which they are subject, as long as submission to these governments doesn't contradict our submission to the Lordship of Christ and his ultimate authority. When it comes to mask wearing for Christians then, if your city or state or country in terms of Scotland is mandating masks in certain circumstances right now, shouldn't you obey these directives? So he says to love your neighbour, wear a mask, and to respect authorities, wear a mask. Here's the third one. He says to honour the weak in our midst. Romans 14. He says mask wearing has sadly become divisive in churches where masks are not mandatory. Some churchgoers will wear them, some won't. Predictably, the groups will start assuming the worst about each other. That mask avoiders are reckless and see themselves as stronger and braver, and that mask wearers are cowardly and fear-stricken, needing a nudge in the direction of risk. In Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8 and 10, Paul argues that in matters of freedom, it's important that stronger Christians don't flaunt their freedom in ways that become stumbling blocks for the weak. When a mask-wearing weaker brother enters a church gathering full of mask-free stronger brothers, the mask wearer naturally feels pressure to remove it. But that's exactly the sort of wounding of the weak conscience Paul says, is a sin against Christ in 1 Corinthians 8 verse 12. So Brett's saying to love your neighbour, to respect authorities, and to honour the weak in our midst. And here's his fourth and final point as to why Christians should wear masks. He says to use freedom for the sake of the gospel. He says sometimes Scripture calls us to give up freedoms for the sake of the gospel. Paul seems happy to give up his freedom for the sake of loving others. Paul writes, for though I am free for all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. He writes also, to the weak I have become weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. So there is missional power, says McCracken, in this posture. He says, few things are more beautiful to witness than someone giving up their rights and freedoms for the sake of others. He says there's a lot at stake for Christian witness during COVID-19, and do we want the non-believing world to look at Christians as reckless virus spreaders who put their own freedoms to gather in person as soon as possible, to not wear masks unless absolutely mandated, ahead of the health of the larger community? Or do we want them to look at Christians as servants to all, as Paul says, willing to forgo their freedoms out of Christ-like neighbourly love? He says this as he closes. He says, in the small annoyance of wearing masks can help not only save lives but also souls, winning more to the gospel. Isn't it worth it? Well, there's certainly plenty of food for thought in that article today. So folks, have a wonderful day today. Do remember, if you're out and about, if you're heading into a shop, have something to cover your face with. And I will see you all again on Sunday.